It's taken a while, but I have finally gotten my hands on the all-new F-150 Lightning for a complete week and run it through my usual battery of comparisons and tests. Now, this is not my Lightning. My Lightning that I pre-ordered right at the very beginning was theoretically built in May. It still hasn't been delivered. Who knows where it is? That's going to be in a separate video. But let's just talk about this top-end Platinum model. This is suspiciously similar in terms of its price tag to the top-end versions of the Rivian R1T. So let's not just talk about the F-150 Lightning, but also a little bit about how it compares to that smaller electric pickup. At its very core, the Lightning is different than the R1T or the Hummer EV truck because this is a half-ton truck that just so happens to be electric. Ford did engineer a different frame underneath the vehicle to accommodate the battery pack and the electric motors, but everything else that you love about the F-150 or hate about the F-150, to be honest, is still here. All the trailering tech, all the towing tech, the style of the regular F-150 inside and outside the cabin is all still here in the Lightning, with a few tweaks, of course. We have this big light bar that runs right across the top. You'll only find that in the upper end trims. If you get the absolute base version of the Lightning, then it doesn't have this midsection right here. We get different sort of grills going on in the front based on the trim, but it's not really a grill because that's part of the hood for the front trunk. Under here, we find approximately 14 cubic feet of cargo space, so if you can fit it in a Camry's trunk, you can fit it in the Lightning's front trunk, and then all the cooling is going on right down there at the bottom. But as you'd expect in an American half-ton truck, we get metal bumpers front and rear. While we're up here, we should talk about the front trunk a little bit. According to Ford, this front trunk is rated for 400 pounds of cargo, so it appears to be a little bit higher than the rating that we find in other front trunks, although most of those other car companies won't give us a specific weight measurement. Here, you could put bags of concrete if you, for some reason, wanted to do that in your front trunk, and there's a drain at the bottom if you wanted to use it as a cooler. Over here on this side, we have some AC outlets, 4 120-volt outlets. Those are connected to the onboard standard 2.4 kW inverter. There seems to be a bit of confusion about the power output capability of the Lightning, so let's dive into that in greater detail. You do not need a Lightning in order to get onboard inverters in your F-150. Some people call these generators. Ford has used that term in the past. Onboard generator is kind of a funky term, I think, but most people are unfamiliar with the term inverter. That converts DC power into AC power. That's what's going on in this, and in a regular F-150, and in the F-150 hybrid. In the regular F-150, you can get the onboard 2.4 kW inverter with outlets in the back and outlets inside that is standard on the Lightning. Also standard on the F-150 hybrid. Now in the hybrid and the Lightning, you can also opt into a second inverter. It's not a bigger inverter, it's an additional inverter on board. There's a 7.2 kW inverter that powers this upper 30 amp locking connector right here in the cargo bed. Then the outlets below, those are powered by the onboard 2.4 kW inverter, giving you a total of 9.6 kilowatts of output. It's important to know you cannot have a single source drawing 9 kilowatts. You can have one source drawing maybe about 6,800 watts through the one connector. It'll peak up to 7,200, but probably not constantly support it. And then you can have other things drawing from the 2.4 kW onboard inverter. This is not the whole house battery backup solution that Ford has been advertising with the Lightning. That's a very different system. Intelligent Backup Power is a cooperation between Ford and their chosen vendor, Sunrun. Sunrun has to install the components in your home, which includes an inverter of its own. For that 9.6 kW of power offboarding from the vehicle to power your home in the event of a power outage, it's not using the onboard inverters. It's not using the inverters that are even powering the electric motors. It's using an external inverter, and power is coming out of the truck via the DC pins right here on this combined charge connector. So it supplies high voltage DC from the battery pack on board directly to that inverter that's installed in your home. That actually powers your home via a transfer switch, and there's also a small battery in there. And that's why that Sunrun battery backup system is a little on the expensive side. My most recent quote from them for a simple installation was around $7,000 or so, so certainly keep that in mind. But you can have a lot of available backup power to your home via that 30 amp locking plug in the back. That is definitely enough to keep lights, televisions, things like that running, perhaps even small appliances, and depending on exactly how you're heating your home, perhaps your heater as well. At least for the moment, the Lightning comes only one way, the most popular configuration for the regular F-150, which would be short bed and big cab. Logically, other configurations would be possible because this is still a body-on-frame truck, very different from the Hummer and a little bit different than the Rivian, which appears to be a body-on-frame truck but with a combined bed and body that are one piece rather than the separate pieces that we find here. So the way this behaves out on the road is very much like a regular F-150 with a little bit of flex between the bed and the body and a regular frame underneath. The frame accommodates the two different battery packs that are available in the F-150 Lightning. There's a 98 kilowatt hour standard battery pack and a 131 kilowatt hour battery pack. Those are the usable capacities. Either of those batteries are powering essentially the same dual electric motor setup in the F-150. The power difference between the base model and the upgraded battery pack is simply the amount of oomph that the battery pack can deliver. This one comes in at 580 horsepower, and it's definitely deserving of the Lightning name because this is by far the fastest factory-produced F-150 that they have ever built. This one will go 0 to 60 in 4.3 seconds, but we'll talk more about that later. Charging only happens over there on the driver's side. This is not a charge door, it's just designed to make the vehicle look symmetrical up front. There are two different onboard chargers depending on the version of the Lightning you're looking at. The base model has an 11 kW onboard charger. With the standard battery pack, if you were to go from completely zero to completely full, it should take about 10 hours or so. With the bigger battery pack, we get the 19.2 kW onboard charger. If you have the ability to support an 80 amp draw on your electric circuit, either at home or at the office, that could get this battery from zero to completely full in under 10 hours. So a lot more power going on for about the same kind of charge window. This is really exceptional if you have the ability to power that charger, because at home, there's going to be less need for regular DC charging because you could charge this completely at night. If you're the kind of person that wants to use the battery all the way down, charge it completely full the next day, it's theoretically possible in this because most people are at home for about 10 hours. Obviously, other charging sessions are going to be faster as well. When it comes to DC charging, Ford seems to be a little bit more cautious than some companies. The peak charge rate on this battery pack is 159 kW at the moment. That could be updated in the future. And DC charging this from about 4% to completely full took me nearly 2 hours. So about the same kind of time that it takes a Rivian to charge completely, a little bit longer in the Lightning, not too much longer, but right there in the same neighborhood. Definitely slower than the Hummer truck, because it will peak at around 350 kW if you can find the right station, but this is significantly more efficient than the Hummer. So actually charging 100 miles worth of range is going to be perhaps a little bit faster in this than in the Hummer. The Lightning needed to be more aerodynamic than the regular F-150, so the sheet metal on the bed did change, but not the sheet metal on the inside of the bed. That means that regular F-150 accessories, camper shells, whatever you want to put down here, cargo tie downs, tonneau covers, etc., all of that will work on the Lightning because the interior is exactly the same as is essentially the major components of the tailgate, including the integrated step right there. We have the measurement areas there, and we have areas where you can put wood clamps there right on top. We have a slightly different tailgate module here in this version of the F-150. The lower end versions of the Lightning will actually have a slightly different tail lamp arrangement, and they won't have this big LED bar that runs right across the back. Now, the LED bars, they're not lit quite as evenly as the ones in the Rivian. That's something that I've noticed on F-150 Lightnings in the wild versus Rivians in the wild, so definitely keep that in mind. If you're a stickler for attention to detail, that might bug you. Down here, we have pretty traditional F-150 components. 7-pin wiring harness, 4-pin wiring harness, 2-inch receiver right there, metal bumpers in the back, and footsteps, of course, to help you get up into the bed. This is something that's lacking in the Rivian that I hadn't considered before, but it's so much easier just to get in the bed of the F-150 than in the Rivian, not including, of course, the integrated step and the fact that we have a power up and power down tailgate. That's a really cool touch. Over a week of mixed driving, I found the front seats to be very comfortable, although just a hair less comfortable than the ones in the Rivian. This seat, however, has the optional massage functionality that really makes this tops in the pickup segment for me. Key feature about this seat is the anti-fatigue seat bottom cushion, which has some different air bladders that move around to make sure your legs don't fall asleep on longer car trips. And unlike most massages, this will keep on operating for hours and hours as you're on those longer road trips. And most front seat massage functions cancel out after about 15 or 20 minutes. One feature that I've always wondered about is this little shoulder bolster here that's adjustable. I suppose if you like sitting in a more hunchback fashion, that could be more comfortable, but I prefer to sit a little bit more upright. We also have a powered tilt telescopic steering column, and it's memory linked to a 3-position memory over there for the driver. As you'd expect out of a full-size truck, we get a full-sized back seat. I have tons of room back here. This is the kind of truck where you could very easily put rear-facing child seats, taller adults, etc. Now, this model does have the optional panoramic moonroof, so headroom is a little bit more limited than the model without it. But scooting all the way over to the right side, this seat is all the way back in its tracks. I still have about 4 inches of legroom left. And the rear bench is very, very wide, so this is certainly more accommodating for adults or larger folks back here as well. You can lift up the seat bottom cushion and have access to a lot of underfloor storage because there's no battery going on here. The battery is entirely within the frame elements. As with the regular F-150 lineup, the floor is almost completely flat. You can collapse this storage area if you want to, so that way you have access to an even flatter floor. And of course, all of the storage area with the rear seats folded up like that. If you want to store the rear seats down and have that storage area essentially locked, there is a keyhole lock there, so you can keep that from folding up if you don't want to. The interior of the Lightning is essentially the same as a regular F-150. Keep in mind this is the Platinum trim, so we have things like this really big panoramic moonroof and upgraded upholstery in here. This has the optional sound system that gives us surround sound speakers in the front headrests. We have height adjustable headrests, height adjustable shoulder belts, an adjustable shoulder section of this front seat back, and the seats are heated, ventilated, and they have an anti-fatigue massage feature. Over on the front doors, we have lots of soft touch materials on the upper section of the doors, but harder plastics down lower, just as you'd expect in an F-150. The bulk of the F-150 components are shared model to model. Really only the upper section of the doors change. So as you work your way up to the more expensive F-150 models, there are still going to be some harder plastics around. And in something like the Rivian, you're going to find consistently more high quality parts on the inside, but they're probably going to be less durable. That's really the payback. And that's why we have hard plastics down there at the bottom of doors on pickup trucks, because it's going to handle scuffing up a lot better than softer materials or fabrics or things like that. In the F-150, we have the same sort of dual glove box we find in the regular gasoline model. One up top, bin style down below, plenty of storage room right there, some soft touch stitched materials, and then we have the big change in here, which is this large touchscreen system basically ripped right out of the Ford Mustang Mach-E and then adapted for the Lightning. We have the same sort of drive modes we find in the Mach-E, with the obvious exception of tow haul and the off-road mode there. You can engage and disengage the one-pedal driving, the rear locking differential, and turn on and off the propulsion sound. Not all Lightning models are going to have that optional propulsion sound from what I'm told, however. We have a 360-degree camera view that definitely has all the same views that you'd find in a regular F-150, including a top-down hitch view. Under access, you can control things like the front trunk, the charge port light, charge cord, things like that. This also has the keypad on the driver's door for locking and unlocking the vehicle. Under towing, you can add trailers and the system will automatically keep track of your mileage and then let you know what your range will be when you reconnect that trailer. So if you have a bunch of different trailers, as long as you're tracking them in the system, it will keep track of your various consumption figures for those different trailers. We also have the Smart Hitch functionality, which basically helps you weigh your tongue so that way you can see exactly how much weight is where. The onboard scales functionality, definitely a unique function in the F-150 lineup, whether we're talking about the gas vehicles or the electric one here. This is really handy. You can either use it as a scale just to determine how heavy something is, or you can have it tell you when the vehicle has reached basically its maximum payload. There's the onboard zone lighting with the lights around the vehicle that you can turn on and off. Pro Power Onboard that allows you to enable and disable those inverter outlets all the way around the vehicle. And you can also set a power down reserve right here. So you can say, I want to make sure that the vehicle has at least 70 miles left of range. Then it will turn off that onboard inversion to make sure that you can get back to your destination. Intelligent backup power, that's that off-boarding system for your home. Then we have the seat settings that are unique to this model with its massage functionality. You can inflate and deflate the bolsters in the seat back separately from one another, right like that. We then have a bunch of settings over here on the setting page. You can adjust a ton of different things in this vehicle. It's very, very adjustable. Things like auto brake hold, the speed limit, pre-collision stuff, review camera delays, things like that. And since this is the fastest F-150 that they've ever built, you can also restrict the speed and acceleration of your vehicle when a valet is parking it. Like the Mustang Mach-E, this system is fully over-the-air updatable, and that includes the entire vehicle, not just this infotainment system. It also supports Amazon Alexa integration and, of course, smartphone integration as well. And in case you're wondering, yes, it does support the portrait orientation mode for Apple CarPlay, so you can really maximize that screen usage if you're into that smartphone integration. Below this, we have the controls for the automatic climate control system, heated steering wheel, ventilated seats, things like that. We use those controls for. And then below, we have a few physical controls for things like the defogger, hazard lights, the autonomous parking system, and stability control. There's also a real power button over here, the same Pro Trailer backup knob that we find in other vehicles, integrated trailer brake controller, 120-volt outlet, 12-volt outlet also in the dashboard. Down here is where we store our smartphones, 2 USB inputs, and a Qi wireless charging mat. Definitely plenty of room in that storage cubby. One really cool function that we've seen in the F-150 for a while that honestly I laughed at before I drove an electric F-150 is this power descending shifter. It pops in there so that way you can open this and create a flat work table. I don't normally hang out in my vehicles, so I found this not to be a terribly handy feature in every other F-150, but suddenly when I was DC fast charging the Lightning and I was there for 2 hours, I was able to get work done on this little table using all the electric outlets that are inside the truck. So I have suddenly discovered that this is actually a handy feature. Behind that, we have two big cup holders for the rear passengers, and this opens to reveal a very, very large storage area. There's some additional power ports down there. There's a divider, and you can hang file folders in here. Over on the driver's side, we found a full LCD instrument cluster. There's a power charge gauge over here on the left side. You'll notice that at this particular battery state of charge, not all of the power is available. We have only 95% of the power available, and as the battery starts to discharge, that number will go down and down and down and down. Now, admittedly, 95% of 775 pound-feet of torque is a ton of torque, but just keep that in mind. As the battery starts to discharge, you'll get less and less power available. Over here, we have the other power and charge gauges that are available on this screen. It shows you what each motor unit is doing separately. The steering wheel has the same round 4-spoke design we find in other F-150 models. You'll find the adaptive cruise control buttons over here on the left side, along with volume up, down. Track forward, backward, or over here on the right, along with controls to that multifunction LCD cluster. For better or for worse, trailering in the Lightning is pretty much the same as every other half-ton truck in America. So the size, the turning radius, all of that is substantially the same as a regular F-150. Turning radius being the key problem for me in my particular area. Some of these spots, like the spot that I have this flatbed trailer parked in, it's really tight and it's difficult to get a half-ton truck to back the trailer up into this spot without, doing 5 million point turns. On the other hand, we do have those camera views I mentioned earlier. Those are going to be really handy here in a moment. Installing the hitch is basically the same as any other half-ton truck, so that means pretty darn easy right there. The height of the ball is pretty standard as well, so not really much difference from a stock F-150 perspective. And hopefully that means I should be able to align everything here in one try. Let's see how good I am. Yep, right first try. Definitely easier to do that with that very top-down view versus what we find in the R1T. Now the vehicle has realized that we have a trailer connected, so I'm just going to go ahead and say no, select and add a trailer because I don't have this existing one in there. See here, don't want to keep using the outlets in the back. We'll go ahead and add the trailer. We'll call this one F for flatbed. Hit the turn there, brake, it's electric, it's a medium brake effort trailer. This is a 26-foot flatbed. The width is around 7 feet. That's probably a little bit wider than 7 feet. This one, I get the height of the cargo. That is a tricky one because, of course, we're going to put a car on it. So I'm not sure where to put that. We'll just call that 6 feet. How's that sound? And then weight, 10,000 pounds. Yeah, about right there. So we'll go ahead and hit next. We'll hit confirm. Then it's going to upload that to the cloud, get some estimates based on the trailer, and then it's going to try and adjust our range estimate. So now it says 54 miles of range there. So definitely not a lot of range with the trailer on, but the battery is already definitely a little bit low, 38% battery charge. Let's try out the Smart Hitch feature, which allows you to weigh the tongue weight on the truck. I love this. I love the onboard scales functionality too. Both of these are absolutely great features. You can see currently it's a little high there on the total payload there with that trailer on it. Let's go over here to Smart Hitch, say yes to the conditions there. We'll go ahead and do quick setup, add all cargo, reset hitch weight. Sure, why not? Oops, make sure trailer's disconnected. Let's go back and disconnect the trailer. All right, now I've removed the trailer from the vehicle. You can see over here on the scales that it shows the weight's been removed. We'll go back over here to Smart Hitch, hit continue. Conventional, let's see what else we have here. Yep, it's a weight distribution hitch. So we'll go ahead and do a quick setup, reset hitch weight. Sure, why not? And then we'll go say next. And then we'll say loaded trailer weight. It's going to be right around 9,000 pounds, somewhere right around there. Go ahead and hit confirm. Then we hop back in, say next, make all electrical connections, cross connect safety chains, blah, blah, blah. Ensure lights function correctly. We've already done that. Raise the tongue jack, done that. Now it shows us the weight on the hitch is in the recommended range, but now I have to load the vehicle onto the trailer. So that means dropping the flatbed and grabbing the Durango. Go ahead and line up the front tires. This is a tight squeeze because this is a fairly wide track on the Durango 392. Now I can hop out and check the weight. Back into the Lightning here. Let's see where we are. If you're not familiar with towing, this is an incredibly handy feature and one that I think every new truck should have on it. For trailer safety, you should have 10 to 15% of the trailer's weight on the tongue of the vehicle. Anything less than that and you're going to have stability issues at higher speeds. Now I think I'm going to nudge things up just a hair further because it is going to make it a little easier to strap down the wheels. And this is why it's such a cool feature, because I went just a little bit beyond and you can see now I'm in the red zone. So now I have to back it up just a tiny bit, make sure we're in the right zone. All right, everything is strapped down. So now it's time to get the F-150 Lightning out on the road. First thing you're going to notice, obviously towing with the Lightning, is that this is full-time four-wheel drive on all versions of the Lightning. And that's definitely different than we find in the average half-ton truck in America. There's still a lot of part-time four-wheel drive systems out there. And that means that on my gravel driveway like that, this is really, really easy to deal with. It doesn't dig holes in my driveway. It doesn't dig holes in this gravel road. It doesn't dig holes in the sharp bends that are here on this gravel road as we approach the paved road either. I love a full-time four-wheel drive system, and in any truck that I was to ever buy or SUV, I need that full-time system because it really makes traction on slippery surfaces, imperfect surfaces, especially when you're towing, so much easier. If you routinely tow in the country, you probably know what I'm talking about. In a lot of trucks, you would just have to go into 4-high. If you have a vehicle with a part-time four-wheel drive system, yes, it's going to minimize some of the traction issues that you'd have on gravel or less than perfect surfaces like this, but it's still going to tear up the road more than a full-time four-wheel drive system like this that's intended to be operating in this mode. There is still a locker back there if you want to, of course. The reason this is important to me is not only do I live on the gravel road, but in coordination with my neighbors, we have to maintain this gravel road. And I'm not talking about paying someone to maintain it. I'm talking being out here with a compactor, with a tractor, with shovels and rakes, etc., actually regrading the road ourselves every year. So I definitely don't want to have to do that any more often than I need to. One thing I did notice about the Lightning is that I was actually able to make that tight turn back there, and that is a concern of mine and has been a concern of mine with other pickup trucks. The turning radius in this truck is just tight enough that it looks like it really could work for me with this flatbed on the back. And this is the flatbed that I use probably the most often among the trailers because you can put pallets of whatever on the back there. You could also put vehicles like what I have on there now, my excavator, a small tractor, etc. Anything like that that needs to go in for service. Or when we were working on our water tank improvement project, I carried loads of 5,000 gallon water tanks about 350 miles on that trailer back there, about 350 miles to get there, 350 miles to bring them back home. So definitely a lot of towing with this trailer on the back. But now let's shift gears and talk about how the Lightning drives out on the road. This is stupid fast for a half-ton truck. 0 to 60 happened in this model in 4.3 seconds. The Lightning is not as fast as the fastest Hummer truck or of course the Rivian R1T. Those are both insanely quick, but this is still insanely fast for a half-ton truck. Now, thanks to the curb weight, it doesn't stop quite as quickly as I would like. And surprisingly, it took a little bit longer than the Rivian R1T. It took this truck 130 feet to stop from 60 miles an hour back to 0. I think that's just the friction brakes on the vehicle. They probably are a little bit less aggressive than what we find in the Rivian. The Rivian is over 7,100 pounds, so it is notably heavier than the Lightning. It doesn't really feel like it out on the road, however. The Lightning, in terms of the way that it drives, it actually feels like it's the heavier vehicle. Part of the reason the Lightning feels heavier out on the road is because it's just bigger out on the road, even though it's not really heavier. The size of it kind of belies the curb weight. We have these big wide mirrors on the side. The cabin is nice and wide. I'm sitting slightly higher off the road in most of the drive modes versus the Rivian. The Rivian will get higher in terms of ground clearance, but the seating position is not necessarily higher off the road. The F-150 feels, again, like a regular half-ton truck. And when it comes to handling, it does feel like a half-ton truck yet again. It doesn't handle as well as the Rivian, but it does handle better, I think, than really any other Ford truck. And that is the amazing thing about what Ford has done under the skin of the Rivian. This has a fully independent rear suspension, so definitely very different than a regular F-150. And you will certainly notice the independent suspension out on rougher roads, like the roads that I am frequently on, whether that's a gravel road or a roughly paved road or a winding mountain road like I'm on here. This is so much more settled in the rear than a regular F-150 or any other truck, really, because pretty much every other truck out there uses a solid axle in the rear. There are a few exceptions, of course. This is one of them, so is the Rivian. But most trucks that you're talking about, whether it's a Ram, a Silverado, or an F-150, they have a solid axle in the back, and they have a particular feel when you're going over washboard pavement. It's the combination of the live axle, where one wheel bouncing up and down is going to cause a disturbance on the opposite side of the vehicle, and the light weight we have in the back. Remember, the average pickup truck doesn't have a whole lot of weight on the rear axle. That's actually quite different in the Lightning. The Lightning has a much better weight balance because the battery pack is pretty big and it's located between the wheels. The entire battery pack lies within the frame elements, so left to right it's pretty centered in the vehicle, and front to back it is relatively centered in the vehicle as well. They were able to put the spare tire back there because the battery doesn't go quite that far back. It stops just about right before the rear wheels. The result is that not only is this the best handling F-150, this is the best riding F-150 by far. And when it comes to ride and handling, I'm going to give both of those scores an A. Both of those scores drop just a little bit below the Rivian depending on the drive mode the Rivian is in. Handling is always going to be better in the Rivian just because of its lower center of gravity, it appears, and the general design of it, but this is a very, very close second and easily ahead of every other pickup truck in America. I was really surprised that Ford chose not to do an adaptive air suspension in the Lightning. I had kind of hoped that they would give this one, but it doesn't necessarily need one as far as ride comfort goes. This has a soft, compliant ride, and it still feels pretty decent even when we have this kind of curb weight on the rear. The Lightning is also very, very quiet. I measured 69.5 decibels at 50 miles an hour in here. That makes this the equal of the Rivian R1T, and this and the Rivian are about equally quiet when they have a trailer connected to the back. There's not a lot of hitch rattle going on. There's a decent amount of isolation between that hitch receiver and the cab that I'm driving in here. I have not been able to tow with the Hummer EV yet. I'm interested to see how that goes because it is a unibody truck, and in unibody trucks like a Honda Ridgeline or unibody SUVs with high tow ratings like the Durango that's on the trailer, you will definitely get a lot of hitch noise in the cabin if you have a noisy trailer on. And that's because you don't have that isolation. So the body of the vehicle just ends up acting like a drum. It really moves that sound from the vibrations of the trailer into the cabin in the form of cabin noise. It's really noticeable, and we don't get that same sort of thing in the F-150. So this is really pretty serene when it comes to towing ability. The next thing we should talk about is regenerative braking, because this is an area where some folks get things a little bit confused. This has a blended braking system, making it quite different than a Tesla or a Rivian that does not have a blended braking system. And what blended braking means is that when you lift your foot off the throttle and you get a little bit of regen, that's not all the regen you'll ever get in the Lightning. If you put your foot on the brake pedal, it's going to blend the sources together. First, it's going to start with regen braking, and then once that has been maxed out and there's no more regen possible, then it's going to start feathering in the friction brakes. So in a Rivian or a Tesla, you want to avoid putting your foot on the brake pedal if at all possible, because that means you're using the friction brakes, no blended system there. In this one, you want to use your foot to control the speed going downhill. And when you're towing a vehicle, that makes this feel very normal as far as towing feel goes, with the exception that Ford does not give you an option to mimic engine braking in a traditional truck. You are using your foot on the brake pedal, and some folks might freak out about that because if you're going down a long hill run, you don't want to overheat your brakes. And in a regular truck, you wouldn't want to do that. You'd want to be downshifting the engine. In the Lightning, that is not a problem because when your foot's on the brake pedal, you're blending in that regen braking. So for most braking effort, you're not really going to be using the friction brakes at all. It's simply going to be regenerating power back into the battery. And it is worth noting that Ford is more aggressive at dialing up the regen even at higher states of charge. So right now the battery is not particularly full. I have access to all of the regen ability from the electric motors. But even when this battery is at 80% or 90% or 99%, there is still more regen ability here for some reason than we find in the Rivian R1T. And I was surprised by that because Ford has been pretty conservative with their battery, but that kind of regen is absolutely essential in an electric vehicle, especially when, if you're going to tow this kind of load back there, you're probably going to want to fill your battery all the way up so that way you can tow it to wherever your destination is, and that is going to limit your regen at the beginning of the battery consumption cycle. Now we should tackle the tricky subject of range and efficiency. Obviously, your range is going to be dependent on a wide variety of factors, but the most important thing to know about the Lightning is that at higher speeds, it's going to be a lot less efficient. It's just a big, boxy vehicle, and so you're going to find that as the speeds ramp up from 55 to 65 to 75 miles an hour, or if you're in Texas in those high 80-mile-an-hour speed limit areas, you are going to see serious reductions in range. Wind resistance is not a linear relationship, so going from 60 miles an hour to 120 miles an hour does not double your wind resistance. It's much, much greater than that, so keep that in mind. If you want to get the maximum range out of your Lightning, you're going to have to treat the throttle pedal pretty gently. In my testing here, if the speeds were kept to 55 to 60 miles an hour, then the Lightning and the Rivian were approximately as efficient as one another. But as you go up to 70 or 75 miles an hour, the Rivian becomes more and more efficient thanks to its greater aerodynamic profile, up to about 35% more efficient at 75 miles an hour. So if you're really worried about range, certainly keep that in mind. I have to admit that when Ford first released the range figures for the Lightning, I thought, wow, this is game over, Rivian. Why would you get the smaller truck when you could get the bigger truck with more range, a bigger cargo area, bigger cab, etc.? But the reality is more nuanced than that. In real-world driving, the two vehicles are a little further apart than you might assume by those numbers. The Rivian is definitely significantly more efficient out on the open highway, especially at higher speeds. You will notice that if you're on a road trip or even in daily commuting if you spend a lot of time out on the highway. This is going to be less efficient than the Rivian, simply because of its bigger profile. Also, if we're talking about slower driving, the figures get closer. And that's why the city fuel economy rating of these two vehicles is actually pretty similar, because in lower speed travel, if you're not using some of the accessories, etc., they're going to be quite similar in terms of their consumption figures. Of course, if you're pulling 9,000 pounds up the hill like we're doing now, then both of them are going to be similarly inefficient. And you should expect consumption figures right around 1 mile per kilowatt hour, maybe 0.9 miles per kilowatt hour. Interestingly, that's about what you get in a Hummer EV unladen at 65 miles an hour on the highway. When it comes to the efficiency score, even though there are going to be variations here and there, I'm going to have to give this a B. The Rivian currently gets an A in the electric pickup truck segment, and the Hummer, it's really right down there at the bottom, let's be perfectly honest. On my road trip range test, this vehicle averaged about 2 miles per kilowatt hour. On my daily commute, where I'm going up and over a 2,200-foot mountain pass every day and have more high-speed travel out on the interstate, that dropped down to about 1.8 miles per kilowatt hour. So this is significantly less efficient than an electric crossover or an electric sedan, just as you might expect. No big surprise there. Be no surprise that now that I have hit the top of this peak, depending on exactly how hard I've been pressing on the accelerator pedal, I've had as little as 50% power left. So going up that hill 61 miles an hour was the maximum speed that I could achieve. I was deliberately trying to see if I could get up to 60 miles an hour. I just barely squeaked it out. The moment you take your foot off the accelerator pedal or pull it back, the battery pack cools down a little bit. This is probably because of the state of charge, mind you. At higher states of charge, this would probably be fine. But at this state of charge, it does take a while for it to recover, and then it goes up to about 80 to 85% power available. Now, currently at the moment, the battery, let's go ahead and take a peek here at the charge thing, is at 19% state of charge, so it is pretty low. But this is the kind of thing you could expect on a longer road trip with a trailer. Again, if you have a trailer and you're trying to go 300, 400 miles with a trailer, you're probably going to want to squeak the battery all the way down there as low as possible, charge it up as high as possible, rinse and repeat. Now, generally speaking, the fastest charging window for any EV is going to be somewhere between 10% and 50%, or 10% and 80%, depending on the battery pack design. So actual time spent at a DC fast charge station may be less, but you'll be making more stops if you try and charge it within that window. Also keep in mind that depending on where you are in the country, you may need to eke out those extra miles, because those DC fast charging stops could be more than 150 miles apart. And that's the kind of range you could expect towing some of the loads that I've been towing. As I said at the beginning of the video, the Lightning is, for better or worse, essentially an electric F-150. That means that it stands alone at the moment. There is no other electric half-ton truck like this in America. The Hummer is quite different. It's much more off-road focused. It's much more insane focused. It is insanely heavy, and it's really, really expensive. The base price of the Hummer is about double the base price of the Lightning. And the Rivian, it's just not the same thing either. Also not quite the same thing is the upcoming Chevy Silverado EV, because that's going to be more closely related to the Hummer. It's going to be a unibody truck, and what exactly Ram's plans are for electrification are a little bit unclear at this point in time. But as I said in the video, I'm going to talk about some of the efficiency numbers here just a little bit more. So at the top of the hill, power was limited to about 50% output. But this was really not a problem for the Lightning, even with this much weight on the back. It was still able to keep up with traffic and even do some passing up those stretches. And in order to get it limited to that 50% output, you had to put your foot on the pedal, really do some longer acceleration stretches, and then slowly the power output level from the battery would start to decrease. And it was very similar in behavior, right down to around 9%. Now, with that trailer on the back, consumption averaged 1.2 miles per kilowatt hour. That was a little bit below the Rivian R1T with the exact same trailer on the back. When we talk about range, there's something important to keep in mind. I've seen a lot of stories out there about, the Lightning, it sees a 60-70% reduction in range when you have a trailer on the back. Not quite true, to be honest. With 9,000 pounds on the back, again going up and over a 2,200-foot mountain pass, this is a pretty strenuous test. The range with this trailer at that consumption level would be about 157 to 155 miles, somewhere around there. It may look like that's a 50% reduction in range, but it is in fact more of a 40% reduction, and here's why. The highway EPA range on this Lightning, as I was testing, is only 268 miles. It is not 320 like you see advertised on the Lightning. The 320-mile combined range, 300 miles combined for the Platinum trim, that's a combined range figure based on 55% city driving, stop-and-go traffic, slow-and-go traffic, low-speed travel, etc., no air conditioning. The highway test, where the speeds are a little bit higher, but not as high as the average American is really driving out on the interstate, that is 268 miles, considerably lower because of the Lightning's aerodynamics. And when we think about range as far as towing, we're talking about highway range, highway towing range. And so in this construct, it's really about a 40% reduction in economy and efficiency, perhaps a little bit more depending on the surface that you're traveling on. For instance, testing the Lightning, as you'll see in upcoming videos, on a more level interstate section, you'll see a drop in efficiency of maybe 30%, maybe 25%, so much more gradual than some places have been reporting, if you keep this in context, because the Lightning, it really won't go 320 miles if you're thinking about highway miles. You take any of the Lightnings, set the cruise control to 72 to 74 miles an hour, drive them out on the open highway, it's not going to get to 300 miles. Now, some folks are going to be disappointed by that, but again, keep in mind the EPA's highway estimate for this Lightning was just 268. It actually manages to beat that a little bit, so right in that range. Be sure and let me know what you think about the Lightning down there in the comment section, and stay tuned because there are a ton of Lightning videos coming up soon based on this Platinum Lightning, the XLT version of the Lariat Lightning that I ended up buying, how it compares to the Rivian R1T and some of the other electric options out there, and a few of the gasoline and diesel options as well coming up soon. Hit the subscribe button. Find me over at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all those other social places. I'll see all of you next week.